Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode of Extra Extra. It's all about whiskey. I am your whiskey wizard, and today, and as always, here he is, the whiskey cherub. Welcome.
Ba-boom.
What a good lad you are. So I was perusing through my latest issue of Wealth Briefing, News, Insight, Intelligence.
I'm so glad you have a subscription to Wealth Briefing. Okay, there you go.
And an article entitled "The Satisfying Burn of Whiskey Investing" caught my eye. And I thought, this is a subject to bring in front of the whiskey cherub.
My gears are already grinding. They really are.
I knew I could wind you up with this one. So our article today comes from Tom Burrows, Group Editor of Wealth Briefing. This is to be found at wealthbriefing.com. And it was posted February 1, 2021.
Oh, that's timely. That's today.
There you go. And so we have the opening salvo here. Some bottles sell for huge sums, and the market for fine whiskey has posted the kind of price gains that attract high net worth investors, among others. A new way of tapping into the market in Singapore opened up with the launch of asset-backed securities connected to whiskey. Can such investing warm investors' portfolios? So that is the setting of the scene for the article.
Can you describe to our listeners the color of my face as you read that opening salvo?
You look like you have spent 30 years in a first fill sherry butt. Let me leave it at that. I will say if you're new to Extra Extra, Joshua or I bring an article to the attention of the other. We read through it in the first half of the episode. We then editorialize, chit-chat, have a back and forth in the second half of the episode, and we try to get this turned around in a tight 30, sometimes a tight 35, but know that we do try to limit ourselves in some way, even if it doesn't always look like it. So, are you ready for the reading, Joshua?
I woke ready, Jason. Woke ready.
Hashtag woke ready. Lovers of fine drinking recently marked Burns Night, a major fixture in the Scottish calendar, by consuming their favourite brands of single malt whisky, not to mention the meat dish of haggis. Parenthetical comment, readers' mileage may vary about their appetite for such a dish. Close parenthetical comment. A fortnight ago, Rare Cask Holdings Pte., a wholly owned subsidiary of Prime Partners Corporate Finance Holdings, listed asset-backed securities linked to casks of whiskey on Singapore's HG Exchange. And then we have one more paragraph of setup, and then it goes into a series of questions that Tom Burrows has put before Rare Cask Holdings.
Okay.
So, the market for fine wine and whiskey, along with other collectibles such as classic Ferraris, Patek Philippe wristwatches, and Fabergé jewellery, attracts large sums. I love glancing at your face at the corner of my eye while I'm reading this to you.
I'm so angry right now at every word you're reading.
As soon as I read that sentence, I was like, I cannot not bring this to Joshua's attention. This is absolute perfection. The allure is both the pleasure of owning and hopefully using the items, and also profiting from a rise in its value. At a time when central banks have hosed markets with liquidity, there are concerns about eventual inflation. Collectibles can, so some argue, be an inflation hedge, and some investors are switching to funds and similar structures to tap into these assets rather than buying and selling directly, such as through an auction. A specialist industry has sprouted, which employs some of the modern tech platforms used to trade more conventional assets. The value of whiskey has surged by 582% since 2009, according to Knight Frank's 2019 Wealth Report.
Take that, GameStop.
I know, right? Good job. Hashtag timely. Some bottles sell for huge sums. A 1926 60-year-old Macallan Michael Dillon label fetched £1.2 million, approximately $1.64 million, in 2018. Another similar bottle fetched £1.5 million in 2019. Source, The Drinks Business, December 2020. This news service, so Wealth Briefing, talked to Rare Cask Holdings about the Singapore venture. Not that we'd like to spend time editorializing during the reading of the article, but is there anything you'd like to say at this point, Joshua? I'm going to take this as a no.
I mean, I started off angry and filled with words, but now I'm just exhausted.
Well, save it for the second half and let's see what we hear along the way.
Thank you.
Okay, so question. This is from Tom Borrow's Wealth Briefing for Rare Cask Holdings. Mm-hmm. What sort of investment returns do you achieve from investing in a mix of whiskies? Answer. Over the past decade, whiskey has quietly come into its own as an underrated investment asset, enjoying more liquidity than many other luxury asset investments, including fine wine. In October 2018, a bottle of rare single malt Scotch whiskey, the Macallan Valerio Adami 1926, was sold for £700,000, approximately $961,000, setting a new world record price. Just a year later, the same bottle was sold for an impressive $1.5 million at an auction held by Sotheby's. The total value of whiskey traded through auction rose 37% in 2019 to a record high of €70.5 million, approximately $85.7 million, from €51.5 million in 2018. So there you go. So there's an increase of approximately €20 million in the space of a year. Whiskey, oh, you're going to love this sentence, Joshua. Whiskey is a unique investment asset. Son of a bitch! Because it is sought after for both consumption and investment purposes. As bottles from a rare cask are consumed, every remaining bottle from that cask becomes rarer and more valuable, possibly providing a long-term hedge against inflation. The ABS are backed by the highest quality, most premium whiskies from world-renowned distilleries, including Port Ellen, Mortlach, Kalila, Talisker, and others. The ABS allows accredited investors to own a portion of these whiskey casks for a fraction of that price. And to be clear, if you're not familiar with the world in which we're dipping a toe today, ABS is asset-backed security, as mentioned earlier in the article. Okay, so that's question one underway, and that's actually the longest answer that they have in this little piece here. And I think they might even ask questions that we're not overly into right now. I think we've got the meat of what we want to go into. But just for interest here, the next question is, do accredited investors buying such securities incur any particular fees? Are there certain minimums they must put in to buy such securities? The answer, there is no minimum investment amount for this unique product, though it is worth noting that each ABS, asset-backed security, token purchased represents one bottle of the particular whiskey selected. competitive fees applying are determined by member firms on a transaction-by-transaction basis. So given what was in the first answer and now given what's in the second answer, this isn't necessarily purchasing casks as an investor. This is purchasing a share in a cask as an investor. And you, upon your return, can decide, am I drinking my share? Am I reinvesting my share? Am I selling my share? What am I doing with this? And so it seems like a thing. Question.
Yeah, go on. Yep, go on. Yep, continue.
Yep, totally normal. Yep, Joshua's totally calm. Calmer than you are, dude. What sort of risks would you say need to be flagged to anyone thinking about this sort of investment? The key thing investors should be aware of is that authenticity matters. The majority of whiskey trading currently takes place through an auction. When whiskey is bought through an auction site, it is difficult to ascertain the authenticity of the liquid in the bottle. Instead, there is a reliance on the auction site to sieve through thousands of bottles monthly and pick out those of questionable provenance. The ABS offered by Rare Cask Holdings eliminates such issues, as the ABS is secured against casks that are currently still stored and aged on site at the suppliers' distilleries and warehouses. By listing these ABS on HGX, the provenance of the underlying whiskey assets are guaranteed. Counterparty risks are also minimized, as HGX is an MAS regulated private exchange, which seems to mean only verified accredited investors can trade on HGX, and the supplier will directly bottle and deliver the bottles of whiskies to Freeport, Singapore. Some of you more knowledgeable than me may know what MAS is. I do not, but it clearly speaks to regulation within the country in which the trading is happening. And I do want to come back to this type of guarantee that's being placed here in the second half. A couple more questions. Why, in your view, has whiskey become such a popular asset class? Globally, increasing standards of living, changes in lifestyle, consumption habits, and a spike in demand in new markets such as China are major factors propelling the sustained long-term growth in demand for whiskey. Also, as we enter an era of low interest rates, smart money is increasingly gravitating towards alternative investments as the hunt for yield continues to grow, alongside an increasing desire for diversification from public markets. The fact that whiskey can be consumed and therefore becomes rarer and more valuable over time also makes it a sought-after investment as a potential long-term hedge against inflation, a part that we heard earlier. There's then a question about, will other types of drinks become hot investment ideas? I'm not getting into that in this podcast. Final question.
You sure cask-aged Negronis won't be a good ASB? I think there could be something there.
ABS?
Whatever, man. Continue your story.
Final question, and this is how the article ends. There's no conclusion. It's final question and done. Does your firm do seminars, etc., to educate and inform investors about whiskey, the varieties, etc.? That is a beautifully formed question. As a consortium-led private exchange, we take a bottom-up approach to building the exchange of the future and pride ourselves on the leading expertise of the members across our network. Our educational initiatives include presentations on alternative asset products organised by our member firms such as Funnell, Prime Partners and Phillip Capital, as well as proprietary research on alternative investments that are exclusively available to all accredited investors on our platform. We're going to go give Joshua a rub down with a brick. We'll be back for the second half.
initial reaction to this story, Jason, is that I would say 80 to 95% of the words used in that article and through the series of questions and then answers to those questions have nothing to do with actual whiskey.
Yeah.
It's like the antithesis of whiskey. Yeah, I mean, I was getting angry because I think it was on Archer, the show Archer, which I've never really watched, but people use Archer quite a lot in situations like this where they would use his voice and they would say something like, "Oh, you want to kill the whiskey industry? Because this is how you kill a whiskey industry." You know, you and I have talked about this before, at least privately. And again, this is separate to this article, but I think in a not so tangential way, it's quite connected. The idea of cask investment, which is getting pitched here, there, and everywhere by many companies, to me is more scary and more dangerous than actual stock investment, because you're buying into the hope that cask will produce a fantastic whiskey. You're buying into the hope that cask will not lose too much liquid. You're buying into the hope that cask, right, because you want the whiskey to get older. The older it is, the more valuable it is. You're buying into the hope that cask stays above 40% alcohol. It's a really risky game. And you and I know, we speak to our friends in the industry who have direct relationships with various distilleries, and they say, "Hey, we got our casks to our bottling hall, and 5 of them came completely empty." Right? And so it's a really, really risky proposition. Now, my hope is that if this company is touting distillery names such as Talisker, such as Macallan, and I forget the other names that they said, that they actually have those casks in their bond. I get nervous. There's so much shady stuff that could be happening. I'm not saying this company is being shady. I'm just saying you've got 25 million casks of whiskey out there, some of them being unidentified. It just all seems so risky to me.
Yeah, there's a couple of points I want to make. One of them I want to pivot back to what you just said a moment ago about the prevalence of this part of the industry. Mm-hmm. And I was telling you and Jess this maybe a couple of weeks ago. My cousin, who's a musician, had reached out to me and said, "Jason, you're in the whiskey industry. I'm seeing a lot of talk around cask investment. Is this a thing I should be getting involved with? Is this a thing that I should be thinking about for my retirement?" And I wrote him back and I said, "Don't do it, man. Don't do it. It's a part of the industry." And then you just alluded to this a moment ago, where a lot of things can change very quickly. And again, we are very aware of the lists that are floating around with casks on them. And we know there are casks being offered for sale by people who are not in ownership of them. And I'm not bringing that up to say, "Whoa, this is wildly illegal," right? I'm bringing it up to say, this is how the industry has worked for a long time. A broker will reach out with a cask list to say, "Here's something I could offer you if you had interest in it. Let me know if you have interest in it. I will seal the deal behind the scenes, and that cask will become yours." That's how the industry has operated, and that's how we understand a part of the industry to operate, and we are perfectly okay with that. We've done deals along those lines.
Of course. Yeah.
The problem is when lists begat lists that begat lists that begat lists, where you've now got 5 different margins on a cask price that's being offered to you, Joe Public, and the sale of that cask is miles away from you. That's deeply concerning, because at any point, anyone in that chain could go belly up. Is that a dog in your house?
I have no idea what that noise was.
It's our lawyers. To reiterate what our dog lawyer was saying there, we in no way are talking about this one company, Rare Cask Holdings. We do not know anything about their business. We're just talking about what we see on the front lines in the industry. But the second point I want to make is it's very difficult to pivot from what a particular bottle sold for to what a cask of whiskey once bottled could sell for. And I did worry about it. You and I were sitting with Sukhinder Singh last January, right next to one of these 1926 60-year-old Macallan bottles, talking about it going for sale at auction. And Sukhinder, in talking about collecting, had talked about the connection to the bottle, right?
Yes.
The people who are in the circles within which he had been moving for a number of years, and what individual bottles meant to him, to then come along and say, okay, that bottle is now worth 1.2 million, 1.5 million, is to completely disconnect it from the life that the bottle has lived. And I think trying to impart that life on liquid that is sitting in cask is incredibly difficult, to put it as nicely as I possibly can.
That's putting it very, very nicely. You know, thinking about someone who might read about this sort of investment opportunity and making the decision to put the care for or the personal connection to that whiskey to the side to say, all right, I'm going to start tracking this as an investment, takes out all of the soul of whiskey.
Correct.
It's and I'm going to make a personal connection here. You know, before you and I started Single Cask Nation, and before Single Cask Nation got as big as it did, you and I were, and we still are, but I'll explain the fight in a second, we're whiskey geeks first and foremost. And our passion lied, you know, with the whiskey and for the whiskey, and saw the magic in whiskey. But I fight daily when it comes to selling cases to this person, selling a cask to this shop, and so forth. I fight calling whiskey askew. Connecting it to an item number that a distributor might sell to a retailer. You know what I mean? Like, it's taking away all of the heart and soul of whiskey. And when someone makes that conscious decision to remove the soul, I think that's tragic. And the other thing that I will say too is the more people focus on the value of whiskey, and whiskey has gone up in value because more and more people are starting to enjoy it. More and more people are looking for those esoteric bottles, etc. You know, the cost of a Lagavulin 16-year-old went from a $45 bottle 10 years ago, or maybe $45 to $55 10 years ago, to a $100 bottle now. As this goes up, it's going to get to a point where bottle prices are not tangible. People are going to stop buying. We're already entering a bit of a whiskey lock. I don't know if you saw recently, Diageo's sales on spirits globally are down 8%.
I did see that.
8%. I really feel as if we're on the edge of a little bubble or a growing loch, and I fear that that various forms of investment will only help to fuel this loch impending crash.
Yeah, there's a part of this where last year when you and I were covering the question, is too much whiskey being released? And we had both a yes and a no answer, but it depended on which hat you were wearing. I know that as we come to an article like today's, if you're an investor, and our friend Taylor Cope has pointed this out on Twitter multiple times, he's professional investor. That is his daily job. And he has gone to great pains over Twitter to say you should not be investing in whiskey. It's a hugely dangerous proposition. And he has his reasons, his professional reasons for saying all of that. You and I are not professional investors.
No.
As you rightly said a moment ago, you and I are whiskey geeks. And when you talk about the loss of soul in whiskey, that's exactly it. And to come back to my earlier point about bottles, individual bottles that become worth millions, exist within an historical context.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and we, in some who have this type of money, and I think this is, to my mind, this is true of artwork, of paintings as well. If you have enough money, you can buy a very small portion of history. You can own history. And I'll give you a very quick example. And this speaks to the soul that you and I are talking about. A couple of years ago, I was through in DC, went to the National Gallery of Art, stood next to a self-portrait as painted by Vincent van Gogh, right? Van Gogh for my American cousins, right? And I stood next to that artwork. It wasn't ringed off. You could stand right next to it. And I stood next to brushstrokes made by the artist. For a moment in time, I stood next to history. And
It's magic.
Right? And it genuinely gave me goosebumps. And if I was a rich fella and I could go around buying art to have in my home, I could have these moments in history in my home that I could exist amongst, right? And I think that is true of whiskey. And part of my great love affair with whiskey is looking at a bottle and connecting to the people who made it. One of the great treats that you and I got to taste was a 1953 Glenfarclas single cask, put out by Wealth Management Solutions, right?
Yep.
Right. People who help rich people spend their money. And that at the time was a £6,000 bottle of 1953 Glenfarclas. But it connected me in time to the people who distilled that in 1953, the grand ownership that was in place in 1953. And that bottle was valuable to me in that historical context. And I was lucky that I got to open my sample, drink my sample, write my notes on that sample, and inhale. And I don't think that's the correct term for drinking, but imbibe doesn't sound quite as positive. The historical context of that liquid. And I think part of that generates the fervour around it at auction. I don't think it's just the fact that it's old whiskey. Old whiskey has a price that exists separately from a bottle that was bottled in 1960 that captures multiple layers of historical context.
So a few things here. Firstly,
A few things and then we're out of here.
we were very lucky in that Glenfarclas was actually good. When whiskey gets to be that age, you are amazingly lucky if it's good. So that made that particular release special, right? Back to the word I used before, magic, right? That was a magical release. My issue is you've got 25 million casks of whiskey sloshing around in Scotland at any given time. Annually, between regular releases, various single cask releases from independent bottlers, from distilleries, private bottlings, etc., annually, you have about 10,000 whiskey releases happening. I'm trying to remember where I got that number from. It could have been the Malt Whiskey Yearbook. It may have been from another source. Anyway, my point is, how many of those 10,000 releases has that special quality that the 53 Glenfarclas has, that 60-year-old Macallan has? It's so few and far between that it makes me very nervous for the investor. The other thing that makes me nervous for the investor is people who are looking to invest in whiskey now are investing at the height of its value. Right? When I was collecting comic books in the 80s and 90s and happened to get a copy of Spider-Man 300, I was really lucky because it increased in value by hundreds. Now I think it's worth thousands. But I bought it for whatever the price was, $1.95, $2.95, whatever it was.
Yep.
And now you've got bottles of whiskey that are selling for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, $1 million plus. And are these people buying those assets because they're hoping they'll grow in value, or because they want mantelpieces? Either way, there's a huge chance that that bit of magic, that soul, that connection to the distillery, the connection to the people who made it, it is gone.
As always, Joshua, there's so much more we could say here. And boy, if we would get a dram inside us, there's really a lot more we could say here. But in the interest of time, we're going to draw to a close here. If you, dear listener, would like to reach out to us, either with a comment or a news story that you'd like to see us cover, just drop us a note, questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com. No E in whiskey. You can also go find our One Nation Under Whiskey page at Facebook. Just do a search for One Nation Under Whiskey. Do we have an extra page, Joshua?
Jason, we have an extra page. It's pretty new. It's still about 2-3 weeks old, so we're still nursing it, but it's growing.
There you go. Facebook search for extra. It's all about whiskey, and you'll locate us as well. Until next time, Whiskey Cherub.
And until next time, Whiskey Wizard.
Chin chin.
2 chins. Chin squared.
Cheers, dear listeners. We're out of here.